Welcome back. So, this is kind of a continuation of both the basics of R, but also the start of like visualization in R, which will be using the ggplot, which is part of the Tidyverse library. So, let's start with when you come into R. As a reminder, you have these four window panes. So you have the markdown pane, the console pane, the environment pane, and then the files pane. So because you're in my world, I will have in the files pane like projects for you, which means that I've loaded in markdowns. I've usually loaded in data, and then also that will include your libraries or packages. So most of the time, you don't have to install any packages. You'll just have to make sure that you load or run the libraries. So because I'm starting this project, I'm going to make sure that I run the library. Remember that I said you always want to start from the top and work your way down? That just means the chunks of code. You can't run your header. That's not a chunk of code, so you wouldn't run that. And then when you actually knit your document, which you did in week 1, that will run. It doesn't really run the header, but it will put the header on your knitted document. Running chunks of code is what you need to work from the top down. Okay. So now what you're going to start noticing is more what happens in the environment window. So I cleaned up what I was working on. You are going to notice that now we're going to be working in the chunk of code that starts in line 15. And now things are going to start happening in my environment window. So I'm going to kind of make this more apparent. So I am adjusting the size of the window pane just so you can see this a little bit more readily. And we're going to start working on the basics of what's called a ggplot. So the grammar of graphics, that's what the ggplot is. It's a huge package, I guess. I don't know if I would call it a package, but essentially like it's the beginning workings of how you can make a variety of graphs. So you can make histograms, box plots, bar graphs. You can make maps with it. You can make a variety of graphs. And I gave you kind of a cheat sheet to show you. And right now I'm going to show you a couple of different graph options, just so you can see what you're capable of making for your final project. And what you're going to be making this week and how you can adjust these graphs to make them more aesthetically pleasing. So we're just going to start now with this chunk of code. Remember, it starts with the 3 backwards apostrophes. I'm coding in the language of R, and then this is just telling me what I'm doing. I'm using the chick weight data, which is part of base R. That just means what's always included in R. And then I'm using the ggplot, which is part of this Tidyverse library. Okay, that's all you need to know about that. And then here in line 16, I'm creating what's called an object. So an object is something that is going to be created and put in our environment. So it's something that I will be able to use later on. So I'm creating an object called P0. I want to assign it to something that I will be able to use later on, and you'll see that I'm going to use it in line 21. So I'm creating an object P0. That is being done by using this left-handed arrow. I could also use an equal sign. And essentially what I'm doing is I'm saying I'm creating the baseline ggplot. I'm using the data chick weight, and I'm using the aesthetic where I'm saying I want the x variable to be weight. Okay? That's it. I'm saying aesthetically x is going to be weight. And when you do that in the ggplot, which is always the start of these plots, that means it will be true for all of the rest of the plots. Now, ggplot is very interesting because you add layers. So like whatever you do in the ggplot, anything added after that is going to happen for the whole plot. Like you're adding layers, layer, 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 layer. And so here you'll notice that when I add the histogram, I'm adding to the layer of P0. So you're adding layers as you go through. So you can add a color, you can add a title, you can add, and you're adding as you go, which is really nice because it helps you to kind of add and make things nicer as you go through. So when you do the very first thing, which is always the ggplot line, you can make what you want to be true for the whole rest of the plot. So I'm going to run that line. And essentially when I run it, you see over here in the environment pane that I just created that object, P sub 0. I ran it, and down in the console pane, you can see I created no errors. And now in line 21 and 24, I'm going to create a histogram. So I'm adding to line P sub 0. I'm creating a histogram. And when it has just open brackets, it's just saying, just create a histogram. Based on what I said for the ggplot, I want you to do it for the data chick weight, and your X variable will be weight. That's it. And with the open brackets, it's just saying, just create a basic histogram, okay? When you have line 24, as you can see in my commented out line 22 and 23, it's just telling you to print that. It's just saying, make that show up. If I don't have that, it would just assign it to the object in line 21 and it wouldn't print it. It just wouldn't show up. So I'm going to highlight both of those lines and run them, and you see two separate things. One, you see it show up in the environment window because I created that object. And then two, and this is where you actually have to scroll to the bottom of your console window, you see that histogram created. So in your, I'm sorry, not your console pane, in your markdown pane, you have to go to the bottom of your code to actually see the histogram created. So here you see we just created a histogram. Pretty cool, huh? Very easy. All you have to do is write your ggplot, the data, what you want your X variable to be, and then what you want your graph to be. I can do the exact same thing. I just call for my P sub 0, so the data I'm using, the X variable I'm using, and now if I want to change to a box plot, I'm just going to assign it to a different object. Now, if I didn't change it and I used the same thing, I used 1A, it would just override and rewrite, instead of having a histogram, it would use the box plot. And I don't want to do that. I want to keep the histogram, and that's why I'm changing it to 1B. I could call it anything I wanted to. I could call it Bob. I could call it Tom. I could call it Eddie. I could do anything I want. This is just so I have some organization to it. So when I run this, again, it creates the object P1B, and then it also prints it, because in line 26, I just typed that P1B, and then you can see down here, I have a box plot for weight. So that's the basics of that. It's creating objects. It's doing it based off of chick weight. It's doing it for the variable X being weight. And it's going to do it that way for all of them because I have that in that ggplot line. Now, a couple of things, and then I'm going to end this video and we'll start another one. One thing is that, remember when we were in the white space, so the text editing space, I said that you could write kind of whatever you wanted. It was space sensitive, and the typing you had to not really worry about. You could do kind of whatever you wanted. In the gray portion, it is case sensitive. So if you have chick weight and it is capitalized this way and spelled this way, and spaced this way, you have to do it exactly that. So it is case, space, and spelling sensitive. So you have to do that exactly that way when you're doing this type of code. So you cannot make errors in code. And usually, like if I delete this, in the moment, I can't think of what that is called. Oh my gosh. Parenthesis? Yeah, parenthesis. I will get a red X, and you will know that you've created an error. So you always have to close those parentheses. And usually, too, if you start to type, like if I deleted this and I start to type weight, it will actually give you some suggestions. The problem is that sometimes the word that you start to type is part of base R or part of ggplot. And so it can be confusing because it's not the variable name that you want. So you have to keep that in mind too. But the nice thing is, and I'll talk about this in later videos, but you can check to see what the spelling and capitalization is of the variables. So keep in mind that these items, when you are in the gray portion and you're coding in the R chunks, that this is case, space, and spelling sensitive. And usually if you have an error in your code like this, it will show you and it will give you a red X before you move on. So you know that there's something that you need to fix before you actually run the chunk of code. Okay, so that's all for this video. In the next videos, I'll move on in the code that you can see here. See you there.